and thank you to our remote audience. So we are gonna just start introducing Project PACER and go from there. So thank you all for coming after a long day with the Ph.D. meeting. I really appreciate that you're back. So I'm just gonna say a few words about the project. Project PACER stands for Patient-Centered Comparative Clinical Effectiveness Research. In short, that's why we called it PACER. It's a little easier to pronounce than the full. So we recently received award funding through the Eugene, Washington PCORI Engagement Award program, which is an initiative of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI for short. So that's another term you might hear quite a bit in the future. So the funds will support building capacity for patient-centered CER, so that's the comparative effectiveness research, on Shwachman-Diamond syndrome specifically, or Project PACER for short. I don't need to tell you what SDS is, but for the remote audience, just in a few words, it's a rare heritable genetic disorder affecting ribosome assembly, protein production in every cell of the body. I forgot to advance the slide. Particularly problematic, it is in the bone marrow because of a very high risk of developing leukemia. And so this clonal hematopoiesis, or the accumulation of mutations, starts in infancy, and frequent blood draws, infections, bone marrow biopsies, and fear are part of our lives. Just a few words about the SDS Alliance. We serve the global SDS community to improve and save the lives of people affected by SDS by focusing on research and therapy development to give SDS patients and their families more birthdays to celebrate. The vision is to build a world where we will be able to live freely without the fear of leukemia, and all patients will be able to live to their full potential. So Project PACER in particular, the motivation of this was to address the unmet needs of the community, and in particular, give us, the patients, more opportunities to engage in research, and not just as research subjects, but fundamentally impacting of what's being researched, how it's going to be researched, and that the things we learn from research is actually things that benefit us, the patient community. So that's why we embarked on this project. And the components are going to be to create a patient and family advisory board that can effectively engage in this sort of research, build a medical and scientific advisory board that understands this type of research as well, and then create opportunities for both groups to actually work together. And by doing so, we believe that 1 + 1, like the two groups, when they come together, they'll be really able to catalyze very meaningful research for patients. So why do we want to do this? So it's for patients and caregivers to have really more opportunities to make a real difference in research, and for clinicians and researchers also for them to learn and appreciate how to effectively engage with patients and the patient community. Also, there are great funding opportunities available through PCORI. As we all know, all through the news, it's very difficult to get research funding these days from many of the agencies. And PCORI is one additional source that could provide meaningful funding for research that's meaningful to patients. How to participate? So later this summer or early fall, that's where the actual project activities will kick off, and we will distribute information about it in all sorts of ways, but there will be opportunities to learn online, in real time or in your own pace. There's also going to be opportunities to then engage with the research community on specific activities. And actually today's PFDD meeting is such an example, right? We came together as a community to share our stories for a very specific purpose in a way that researchers can absorb, understand what we need, and then put it into action and design their studies accordingly. So that is, in a way, one activity that's contributing to this concept of patients playing a key role in research. So as an added bonus, because we recognize the importance of patient involvement, we are also able to offer compensation for your time and participation. So we really value your contribution in many different ways. So now today's activities are gonna be the first step to start learning about what comparative effectiveness research is. So I'm very happy to introduce Vanessa again. Actually, I'm just gonna grab my note. Okay.
I heard it already.
All right.
I'll highlight the important parts.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Slide should I just do here?
Yes, I think Jeff is going to bring up your.
Perfect. Okay, well, while we pull that up, I'll introduce myself. Everyone who was here for the PFDD meeting heard like my little official bio, but I'll give you the slightly longer explanation of how I came to work with this project and how I'm looking forward to working with you guys for the next 2 years of this project. So my name is Vanessa Merker. There are folks online who haven't heard. I'm a health services researcher working at Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm also an assistant professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. I've been working in the rare disease community for 15 years, but I'm pretty new to the Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome community. I've only been working here in kind of the past year, and this has been my first chance to really talk to and meet so many families. So it's been such a great time to see you. One of the reasons that I am interested in this work is I really believe that a lot of the challenges that people with rare diseases face in seeking care are so similar across disorders. And I could see that just today. Much of my work so far has been in neurofibromatosis and schwannomatosis, which are groups of rare genetic disorders that predispose people to have nerve sheath tumors and also bone issues, learning issues. You can see some of the similarities with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome here, very multi-organ system kind of expression. And folks talk about the same issues, getting a diagnosis, traveling to see specialists, paying for care. And so a lot of my research is focused on how can we try to disseminate information about care and improve care and access to care for folks with these diseases. Also, the other half of the research that I do is really focused on understanding what patients and caregivers need when it comes to new treatments and specifically in clinical trials. So doing things like giving people surveys or what's called patient-reported outcome measures, interviewing them to see how they feel in their trial, what they're really experiencing, and working with patients as partners. So not just as subjects in the trial or the studies, but as partners who give us input on how we should even design the projects. What should we be studying? How should we measure the success? And working together. So I'm really hoping to bring some of that expertise over into the Shwachman-Diamond syndrome so we can kind of learn from each other and kind of have some efficiencies there instead of each of us all reinventing the wheel. And so I am here today to talk about the project. And I should say a big shout out to PCORI for this engagement award. We actually had funding for a similar type of project in the NF community. I think it was, by now like 9 years ago, and held a meeting to do these kinds of similar trainings. And I have personally a PCORI grant right now to try and help patients with NF and their primary care providers learn about care guidelines. So it's been a really great partner to work with and a lot of good funding to support rare diseases, which we'll talk about. But I promise not to talk too long today. I wanted to introduce basically what are the 3 topics when we looked at what I was asked to talk about and what Project PACER is. We'll break it down. So what is patient-centered research or patient-centered outcomes research, which you might hear? What is comparative effectiveness research and why does that matter? And what is stakeholder engagement or patient engagement in research? And then we'll just quickly wrap up kind of tying that together. What is the federal interest in this and what are we hoping to achieve moving forward? So I wanted to actually start with something interactive. What does patient-centered research mean to folks? How would you, knowing there are many patients and caregivers in the room, define patient-centered? What would make research feel patient-centered to you? Any ideas? Looking at real experiences. When you say real, can you say a little bit more? Looking at like their each individual unique experience with treatment. Yes. Versus the whole population actually looking at the specifics. Yes. Yes.
With the patient at the forefront, thinking through.
Oh, thank you.
Thinking through really everything about what that patient's going to need that's kind of, going through the research or being studied or taking the treatment. It's thinking through how are they going to get to the doctor's office? What are they going to be provided to collect data? Is it, a technology that they understand how to use, is there training, so it's really just making sure that the patient is at the forefront and we're thinking through how to make things easier for them, holistically.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say.
And I think we'll definitely come back to that when we talk about stakeholder engagement and what role, especially you guys could play. We often have blind spots as clinicians and researchers designing the research protocols into exactly what do people need to actually get here and go through all of these motions and collect this data. And so getting input from folks on how to design that in a way that's going to be as easy as possible for people to participate in is so important. Yes.
So to me, patient-centered research is really the questions you're asking, your research questions and your hypotheses are things that the patients actually need the answers to. So I know from that science perspective, it's great to be like, I wonder, but when you're really looking with that patient-centered piece, it's that, what are the patients wondering? What are their needs as we're doing this? And so that really guiding those research questions.
Oh, yes, you are right on the money here. That is exactly, and I will come up to other ones I was going to say, that is exactly how PCORI, at least, is defining patient-centered outcomes research is a lot by the topic, not just how it's carried out, but what questions we even ask. So I'll get into that more, but I want to hear from you guys kind of what you think about as we're trying to decide and do patient-centered research.
I really wish people would do more on mental health and like the fact that we're not just like lab rats, and the fact of like just researching us. We're not specimens. I've had a lot of people that are just like specimen this, or it's like I have a name and I have likes and I have what I want to do, like when I grow up or things like that.
Yeah.
Like I wish people would more lab rats. We're not lab rats.
Yeah, I think it ties into both points, right? Like treating people respectfully in the trials and designing them in a way that has, and addressing questions that matter, not just maybe the physical thing or the thing that comes up with mental health, social health, all sorts of things. So this is perfect. You guys are right on the money. I'll tell you, how does PCORI define patient-centered research? So there'll be 3 slides here. So really they focus on the topic. And so specifically Research that, so the first thing here, assesses the benefits and harms of health interventions to inform decision-making, highlighting comparisons and outcomes that matter. So really looking what are the different pros and cons of different ways that we could be treating issues or approaching healthcare in a way that's really actually going to help people make decisions. So not just for academic purposes, but to really bring this to the clinic. And I kind of think of this with this diagram of how can we really bring together the best clinical expertise, research evidence on what matters, and patient values and preferences, and find that intersection of what's going to be the best for each individual person. They also focus on the fact that it has to focus on outcomes that people notice and care about. So this isn't to say that sometimes basic science research isn't needed or things about lab values or tests, but patient-centered outcomes research really focuses on the things that you would notice in your day-to-day life. And that can be things like functioning or symptoms, and oftentimes it's broader, like you said, mental health, quality of life, things that it might touch on functioning at school, all sorts of things, not just maybe specific medical imaging or lab results. And then the last issue that they really highlight is it has to incorporate a wide variety of people in a wide variety of places, because we need to study this wide group of people with all different preferences and backgrounds and issues and symptoms if we're going to be able to then tailor what works for each individual person. So really focusing on having as much broad outreach as possible and studying in settings beyond just maybe a few academic medical centers, really out in the community, across the country, and across the world. And so to focus, now that we know what it is, kind of why is it so important? Why are we interested in kind of bringing this to the SDS community through this grant? Really, the reason we do this is to try to help people make informed healthcare decisions, have their voices be heard in the value of assessing these options. So really, the goal here is to promote research that's going to then help you or the next patient with SDS make a decision when they're sitting in the clinic. What information, thinking of the questions that you might have been asking your own physician, and they said, I don't know, I'm not really sure what's going to happen when you take that. Having that data that to then give to the next family. So this answers questions like, given my specific characteristics, so maybe given my specific mutation or the specific lab results we're seeing, what do you expect is going to happen to me? Being able to tailor those predictions. What are my options? What are the harms and benefits? Helping people weigh what are the pros and cons, and really getting more information on what are the pros and cons if we don't know them yet. And what can I do to improve the outcomes that are most important to me? So what, not just treatment, but are there preventative things that we could be studying, supplements, exercise, therapies, a whole range, not just drugs that we're interested in, all kinds of therapy. Okay, I won't quiz you on what is comparative effectiveness research, because I think this word probably doesn't have as much resonance, but it also is luckily slightly easy to explain. Comparing effectiveness of treatments is what we're talking about. So comparative effectiveness research, which is also called CER for short, is the kind of research we do to compare benefits and harms of different treatment options. And we do this because we're trying to generate evidence that people can use, both patients and caregivers, but also insurance companies or hospitals or the FDA, to make informed choices about which therapies are most effective when you put them head to head. And so a lot of types of research can contribute to this. I put this up here. It's a little bit, probably too busy. Let me see if I have a slide. But there's lots of kinds of research that can answer this question. Some of it is what we call evidence synthesis, looking at what's out there and comparing this. So some of this might be just looking at the literature, analyzing many studies to try and see across all of these different research contexts which things have the most consistent evidence of benefit, which ones consistently come up, that we think maybe are more effective than others. For a lot of the case, there's not a lot published, and we need to do new research, so generating evidence. This might be through clinical trials. It might also be through observational research. So not all of the research needs to be that you're getting a new medicine in a clinical trial. Some of it is us following people as they're getting their day-to-day normal care and seeing what happens. So maybe tracking in the electronic medical record what's being prescribed and what people's labs values are, giving them surveys to try and compare what's going on. And really all this is in service of trying to translate this evidence into practice, disseminate it back out. So a big part of this is also not just finding out what works better, but then sharing that information so people can make decisions. So really trying to see which treatments work best for whom, under what circumstances. Speaking again to that personalization, not just a blanket, everyone needs to take Creon, but maybe if you have X kind of or Y symptoms, Creon is going to be the best bet, but actually maybe a different enzyme would be better if you had this, kind of letting people weigh that. So really getting back to then a question, why do we care about this and why are we trying to kind of move to this? We really want to both generate and synthesize evidence that will compare benefits and harms of different methods to either prevent, diagnose, treat, or monitor conditions or improve care. And I know this is a complicated statement here because there's a lot of those, but I thought it was important to highlight. I think one thing that people get kind of confused about might be we don't even have a single treatment for some things. How are we going to compare two things head to head? Like, we're a rare disease. We don't even have that much, but it's a lot broader than just, for example, a drug. There are a lot of things we can compare about how we deliver care, how we monitor the condition. So I'll ask for your forgiveness if I messed up some of the wording since I'm a little new to Shwachman-Diamond syndrome, but just listening to the PFTD meeting today, I thought about, it's not just about maybe a new treatment and what's most effective. Could we compare the different supplements or types of enzyme replacement therapies to see which ones work better for which people? Thinking about the drug regimens for stem cell plants, thinking about like the dosing, right? Someone had to first say this high dose of medicine maybe doesn't work and we should compare that to a lower dose to see if people will still get the benefits without having as much of the harm. So that's one example. Also strategies to monitor for bone marrow dysfunction, currently with the bone marrow biopsies being the standard. What about the potential for cell-free DNA, which is a new blood test kind of technique being used in other syndromes to actually look at the DNA that's just floating around in your blood that comes and is shed off from other parts of the body and testing those head to head. So that would be like one example of something that would just be about how we monitor the disease and comparing which is more effective and over time and which has less burden to patients. So all sorts of questions. And really what we want to work towards over the next 2 years of this project is figuring out what are the important comparative questions to do and help inform that so that we can help people do research that matters. Okay, this one I am going to go back to quizzing you. So this is the last kind of term that was in the grant, which is stakeholder engagement. We also call it patient engagement or patient and public involvement in research. And so I wonder if anyone has any thoughts. Does that term mean anything to you guys off the bat? To think about what it would mean to be engaged in research, truly engaged. Yes. Yes, we heard to participate, have a voice in it. Yes. Skin in the game. Can you say more about that? Yeah. That the people who are personally affected that have the skin in the game are part of the research. Yes.
Has to be some sort of positive or gain to get into it.
Mm-hmm. Having a gain to the patients to get into it.
There's it has to give,
give back. Maybe I'll put some words into your mouth, like have something that is going to benefit. Yeah, benefits.
Okay. Oh, wow. And that we get to work with the people that are creating these new therapies or medications or whatever it may be, so that the people that have the syndrome or are caring for people that have the syndrome have a voice at the table as well.
Absolutely. That is a perfect one, I think, to end on. That is exactly what we mean. And so I'll go through this definition kind of one by one because it's really long. But stakeholder engagement or which is the broader term for all kinds of people that might not be traditional researchers. Oftentimes we focus on patients, but this could also be clinicians who don't normally do research but are on the front lines providing care, or it could be people who are working in the government or drug companies, anyone who's not traditionally on the research team being invited to be part of that. And so I'll walk through the definition one by one. It's the active and meaningful collaboration. So active participants that are actually meaningfully doing work together between patients, clinicians, researchers, and actually others across all stages of the research process. So from the very beginning of planning all the way through doing it and disseminating those findings back to the community, working together. With research decisions guided by each person's contributions as partners. So this is important. Participating as a partner, as a team member, not just a subject or a participant or a specimen, like you said, but actually as another coworker and colleague, a person on the team who's equally respected. And recognizing everyone's specific expertise and experience, including the lived experience. So really valuing the same way that it is so beneficial to me to have a biostatistician who really knows quantitative stuff and a clinician who really knows what the clinical thing is, equally much the patient who actually lives this day to day. And the more perspectives that we can bring to the table, knowing that that will make the research more effective. Kind of a little bit of background for kind of why we do this. And I took this slide actually from someone I've worked with briefly who himself had a rheumatology condition and was so fascinated with participating with research that he went back and got his Ph.D. in patient engagement in research, which not everyone has to go get a Ph.D. to do this, but it was a really full circle moment of finding out as a patient being so interested and then deciding to pursue that professionally. And I thought he had a great kind of summary of all the different reasons that we do this, that part of it's just an ethical reason, right? People have a right to speak for themselves. Nothing about us without us, I think is the phrase, that if it's going to be decisions that then affect what kind of medicines are available to you and your family or what we pursue, you deserve a say in how that research is shaping up. There's also the reason that it just makes the research better. That's what he called this content argument, that it simply makes the research better. And I'll show some evidence about how that's true. It makes the treatments that we have or the trials that we have fit better into people's lives, be more easy to participate in, have more representative findings. It actually is making research better, so it's worth doing. And then part of it is also for, he called it the political argument, but to increase the legitimacy of findings, right? If we are thinking ahead to disseminating findings out to the community, of sharing this with people, if they've already had a stake in participating, they're probably more likely to take it up. So for example, if we can involve some of the clinicians in the early stages, then maybe they're more likely to accept that evidence and change their practice and change their prescribing down the road. And then also empowerment. And I want to say both for patients and researchers, both to help patients feel like they have a voice and maybe feel like they can put some of what they've experienced, sometimes which is difficult, to kind of a better, higher use. And it's for researchers, I'll say, very fulfilling, empowering. I've learned so much personally. So it's really all members of the team benefiting. And what does this look like in practice? It could really be very varied. So when we talk about preparing people to engage in research, we really mean throughout the process. So I know this is kind of a busy slide, so I'll start here kind of at the top. So this is kind of going through doing a research study. So identifying topics for research, clarifying the research question, designing the study, so getting input on what methods would be ethical, what would be appropriate, what would be benefits and risks that people are willing to take, what outcome measures we should use, through applying through grants, so being part of the process to define these outcome measures and be on an advisory group perhaps for a grant, all the way through planning recruitment and data collection, what is it that what should we be collecting data on? What's too much burden? What's going to be easy enough for people to do and get high quality data? How should we measure things? Where should we go to recruit? How should we recruit? How should we pitch this? How do we explain it in a way that makes sense and is not 20 pages of legalese in a consent form, which I'm sure you've all had the experience of having to do. And then all the way through analyzing and interpreting data. We don't expect people to suddenly have a degree in statistics or qualitative research. But I will say for me, as someone who does qualitative research, being able to say, I'm hearing these themes, or I hear this quote and this is how I interpret it. Do you think that's what they're actually trying to say, is so helpful. So even that can be part of the analysis process as a patient. And we've had many people present in findings, come to conferences, co-present, or even present on their own about the study to be able to share that back with the community. And then this goes all the way through dissemination and implementation. So that's dissemination is like getting the word out to people, and implementation is actually getting it into practice. So maybe helping people who aren't involved with research understand the findings and implement them and start to change their practice. And evaluating how did it go, which always goes back to new questions that come up, new things, new challenges. So keeping that cycle going. So when we talk about this, there will be a whole lot of things that can be asked of stakeholders. So also if something isn't really your vibe and you say maybe you don't want to be on an advisory board or commit that amount of time, but you do want to come to a focus group or an advisory panel that's going to meet once to talk about something else, you can all the opportunities will be different. And so you can kind of pick and choose. So just if you see one and you're like, oh, that's a lot of time commitment or not my particular interest area, there'll be a lot of opportunities and different ways to participate and be engaged. And I'm sorry, this is also not really busy. I should have put this on smaller slides. But actually, the one take home I want to have, which maybe the busyness helps, is there are so many benefits of stakeholder engagement in research. This was actually a paper from PCORI. They analyzed many of the grants that they had funded and looked back to see how did the stakeholders contribute to the project. And there were so many ways, all the way from a lot of the things we've just talked about, identifying the topics, kind of refining the topics or questions, determining what outcomes really matter, what choices to compare, helping design the projects, adapting the intervention to make it easier to deliver or be more relevant to people, training people to deliver those interventions, helping with recruitment, retention, data collection, how to collect it, when to collect it, reordering, shortening things, helping with analysis, and then again with dissemination. And really this has had so many benefits in terms of making research that's more meaningful to patients, addressing really early on real world barriers to implementation, having less burden for the patients or providers who actually participate in these studies, trying to make things more usable, more generalizable, better quality data, faster. Like if it actually is something people want to sign up for and can do, you can do them faster, make progress faster. So really, and I'm happy to share these slides later, so many demonstrated benefits to anyone who's new to this of doing this work and investing in this. And so the last thing I wanted to end with is kind of what the federal support has been like for this topic, kind of our interest and why we're trying to kind of bring all three of these into the SDS community. One is the FDA. So as everyone here in person knows, we just had our externally led patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA, which is part of their larger patient-focused drug development initiative. And they really want to try to make sure that patients' experiences, perspectives, needs, and priorities are captured and meaningfully incorporated into the development of new medical products. So that really looks like throughout the whole drug development spectrum, seeing what impacts, so what burdens of the disease and treatment matter most to patients and how do we measure them? That's exactly what we talked about today at the Ph.D. meeting. And then what aspects of clinical trials can we tailor better to meet the needs of the patients who might be participating, make it easier for them to participate? how do we integrate patient-reported outcome data or other patient data directly from patients saying what they would like and prefer and how they feel into the clinical trials, and then how do we communicate that information back? So this is something FDA broadly has invested in and is interested in, and that's why we're doing some of this work today. And then Project PACER is funded by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is not technically a federal agency. It's not like the NIH or the FDA. It's an independent nonprofit organization, but funded and authorized by Congress. So a little bit related to federal things. It's actually funded, a lot of people don't know this, through the Treasury and a tax on insurance companies per person. So that's where most of their budget comes from. And it focuses specifically on this patient-centered comparative effectiveness research, and you have to do stakeholder engagement. It's required. So not efficacy, so they don't do the early stage funding. Oh, I'll answer one sec. Not the early stage funding of like, let's test in a mouse model if this drug works, but the later stage, like we talked about, comparing options that are actually out there and different ways to manage things with stakeholders. Yes.
Sorry, I thought.
Yes, that is a worry, especially because you can see on the timeline, it was created actually as part of the Affordable Care Act, which is also known as Obamacare, and a lot of people don't know that's what created this institute originally. I cannot speak on behalf of PCORI. I don't actually work for them. I'm not sure what they would say about it. I would just say the funding is definitely different because it's not actually a government agency like NIH and FDA. So we haven't seen the same actions so far and mechanisms. Yes, I would say it's adjacent enough that it's a little bit concerned. I'm sure everyone is watching out, but so far it is different because it's not actually a government agency directly under the government control, but the money does come from there. So it actually has been authorized twice for 10 years at a time. So it was created as part of the Affordable Care Act and started funding its first projects in 2012. I put this up. They have a very unique interest in rare diseases specifically. There's a rare disease advisory panel, and there's specific funding for rare diseases if people are interested in looking that up. And then in 2019, it was reauthorized for another 10 years. So at least for now, it is set up through December 2029, and hopefully then gets reauthorized. We'll see. But at least for the next 4 years, we have funding. And this was just to say, it's not only the research they fund that they use this kind of patient and stakeholder-led approach, it's actually how they run the agency. So for example, patients serve as advisors. They help review grants and pick which grants are funded, what topics are going to even be announced, to solicit proposals. And it's pretty big. So this is a little out of date, March 2023, but $4 billion of healthcare research. So a lot of people, I think, are used to hearing about NIH and the government, but this has been actually a pretty significant amount of money and an opportunity to get even more funding to SDS and other rare diseases. Okay, so I'll end there. That was all I had to say. I don't want to overwhelm people. We have a whole 2 years to actually work more on this, but hopefully it gave a tiny taste of like what is patient-centered comparative effectiveness research when you see the PACER abbreviations, and giving you a little taste of kind of why we want to partner with all of you, everyone online who might be watching or watching this as a recording, to work together on research and building the capacity for this. And I'm happy to take any questions that people might have. It's okay if there's no questions. I know it's been a long day.
Spots, like a participant. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Is there a certain amount of spots of participants, or do you have a goal of participation, or?
That's a good question. Eszter probably knows this. I think for some of the specific deliverables, we'll have targets, which maybe Eszter can talk about, but also the idea of in general promoting this, no targets. We would like as many people as possible to kind of, I think, learn about this, apply for PCORI funding themselves, really equip the community to take it and run with it.
Yeah, exactly. So the award that we received is to build the capacity to use this type of knowledge and attitude towards research for SDS. So our goal is to equip the researchers to run with it. As Vanessa said, in terms of numbers, the more patients participate, the better. For specific activities, like if we have in-person meetings, there might be a cap how many people we can accommodate, but I'm not worried. Like, we'll make it work. So the more, the better.
Yeah.
So you mentioned deliverables. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about what some of those might be, like what.
For Project PACER.
Yeah.
I'm also going to then defer to Eszter as the main applicant.
So deliverables are basically, we have to show activities that are effective in implementing this kind of knowledge. So we'll have conferences or meetings or workshops that will teach us how to be effective patient advocates, and we'll have workshops and such for researchers to teach them how to effectively engage with patients and other stakeholders. So the deliverable for this particular award is really the capacity for us to then, as a community, apply for grants or awards through PCORI and be able to execute this type of research project with the patients at the center. So that's the deliverable, not a particular research question or not a very specific project itself. It's the capacity to do whatever project is meaningful to us.
Yeah. That's the nice part about PCORI is that not only do they invest in actual specific research awards, so like the one I mentioned I run is for a specific project in NF, but they do this capacity building, engagement, and dissemination awards, so really committed across the life cycle. So this is one of the awards to help give us actually money to participate and help work together, and then hopefully spawn many a PCORI project of the future for folks who want to apply, or other agencies as well. It doesn't have to be PCORI.
I wanted to ask a little bit more in depth about the advisory panel. Is it going to be like an application process to be able to serve on it? I know you said kind of people can serve in different capacities for as much time that's available, but will there be a cap for the actual like advisory?
Yeah, again, I guess I should be clear. I was thinking in general, as there's opportunities in research, there'll be so many varied ways that people structure this. Some are as much as a one-time thing. For example, in my PCORI grant, we have a patient advisory board that meets once a month virtually, once a year in person. But like there could be very different ones. For this specific award for engagement, I think there's a specific commitments or some ideas, right? I'm going to make Eszter get up here. I'm like the general patient-centered effectiveness research. Eszter is the go-to person for Project PACER's deliverables.
So one of the nice things about this project is that we as the patient kind of can influence the project itself. So the project itself hasn't been worked out because we want everybody to be involved. But in general, we will have meetings, learning activities, workshops, and we want to structure it in such a way that people with different amount of free time can participate in meaningful ways. So some people might be very hands-on and invest a lot of hours and time, and others may be just picking and choosing certain activities that fits into their schedule. So we want to make it as inclusive as possible. Again, I think another type that Vanessa touched upon is the institute. The PCORI Institute itself also has opportunities for patients to engage and shape the overall programming and priorities of PCORI itself. And there are also application processes and different opportunities there, but I'm not very familiar with those.
So if I were, for example, to have a research proposal that involved a specific aspect of a disease that affects people, would I apply directly for a PCORI grant or would I go through Eszter?
PCORI.
Okay.
But our program would help you understand how to structure the project in a way that would fit into PCORI's priorities.
Okay. Okay. I have 3 proposals in the works.
Yeah, if anyone's listening online or interested, they have a specific RFA for rare diseases the LOI is due in early September. So get those ideas cooking.
And they're very large, so it's worth looking.
Oh yeah, I think up to 5 years and $12 million. So a significant investment.
So if there are no other questions,
I'll be here though if you think of other questions, and I'm sure I'll see you guys over the next 2 years.
yes, thank you, Vanessa. So Vanessa is on our advisory board too. And she's going to work with us in developing and delivering this program. For today, the next official part of the program is actually very open-ended and non-pressure. So I was thinking we could look at each other's posters if you haven't done so, and we can talk to each other. And also, if you could do that in a way that you could think of like what additional information you would like to share with others, or was something too much or too little, just think of it as a way to communicate the unmet needs or what SDS is like for you, and what other tools may be beneficial in facilitating that sort of communication. But no pressure. If people want to hang out, we can talk about that later. But I think given that this has been a long day, I think we can make this the official end of the structured program for today. And thank you all for coming.